When I was little, my father was famous. He was the greatest samurai in the empire. He cut off the heads of 131 lords. He was the greatest samurai in the empire. And he took me with him.
Hey everybody, this video is my last word on moon landing denier Richard Anderson, who now goes by Richard Lionheart and is also Primemac and used to post as Misty Odell. Richard is kind of obsessed with me. He's put me in at least, 8 of his videos, 4 of which had nothing to do with me. He just seems to like my look. And he comments on every video of mine, even if he has nothing to say. Now, Richard doesn't live in the same reality as the rest of us, and because of that, every argument he puts forth sucks. He's just really bad at critical thinking and communication. So, a little over a year ago, he put up a 4-part rebuttal to my Above the Belts video. It was poorly done, and I said I would make a counter to it, but I held off because I knew it would be a long video. It takes a lot more time to show that something is nonsense than it takes to actually make nonsense. His series is supposed to be a critique of my video, but he doesn't know how to make an argument, and thus his critique is garbage. It's an absolute wrong approach to critical review. So this is my rebuttal to his rebuttal, and I'm going to try my best to do it the way I think it should be done. So as you can see, it's kind of long. And it could have been longer because in breaking down his series, I came up with 2 sections that really needed to be their own video to keep this from being too long and from drifting off the subject. So any of you who wanted to see me make more moon landing videos, you can thank Richard. His video series was so garbage they inspired 3 whole videos. This video starts off with 2 clear missions. This video is about critical thinking, and it is a rebuttal to my Above the Belt video. Richard poses a question at the beginning.
But did we really go?
He then shows a clip from my video where I demonstrate how a transparency applied to a window, like many moon landing deniers like Richard claimed was used, would actually respond to camera movement compared to a distant object. He doesn't provide a context for this clip, he just goes right to it. He says that my demo is not like the Apollo footage I'm comparing it to, but since he didn't show the footage that I was referring to, he cuts to a separate shot not used in my video, the viewer has to take his word for it. If he were to actually show the footage I was comparing, which is here, and you can see they share similar motion, he wouldn't be able to make that statement, so it's in his best interest as a moon landing denier not to show the footage. What he does do is go on to propose his own theory about how transparencies were used in combination with models. But instead of diving into that, he stops to mention that in this footage, again, not part of my Above the Belt video, there is a blue haze around what he says is the Earth, and that
shouldn't be there. That's part of the transparency I'll show you here in a moment.
He doesn't provide evidence as to why it shouldn't be there, just makes the claim that it is there because of transparency and model usage. Now let me take a moment to point out that Richard has already failed at his 2 missions, just 2 minutes into his first video. By not providing the context of my demo, and by not supporting his statement as to why the blue haze should not be there, he has already dropped the ball on critical thinking. And by moving on to his own subject about how models were used, he's changed the subject away from the content of my video. That's how bad at analysis Richard is. And actually, it's even worse. Let me back up, and let's notice this statement Richard puts on the screen and then mentions. He writes that the camera is not right up to the window and then says,
but notice here that the camera's not right up to the glass.
Why does he say this? Did I claim the camera was right up to the glass in my video? Nope. Well, then who did? What Richard is referring to is a claim that many moon landing deniers like himself put forth, and was put forth in the film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. That is, that the astronaut speaking during this clip says that the camera is right up to the window, or pushed up against the window, or as Richard says, right up to the glass. Here's how it was put out during the film.
Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
Unfortunately, we only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes...
The film then comes to the very section that Richard uses here and calls it the real camera location.
Finally, the iris is opened up, and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
So that's where he got this idea and why he made this statement. The problem is he and the makers of A Funny Thing have made two critical errors. First, they exaggerate what Armstrong actually said.
Unfortunately, we only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera. So,
notice how the narrator says, putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, and Richard says, right up to the glass, while Armstrong himself said, one window is filled up with the TV camera. Those are very different things. The second crucial error is that both the filmmakers and Richard ignored the context of the entire exchange and what else was said in it. Either they did it on purpose, making them liars, or they did not do proper research, which makes them bad at their job. A full breakdown of this error can be found in my video, Moon Landing Deniers, Put 'em on the Glass. But I digress. Richard then alludes to being able to prove the type of model/transparency that was used during the mission, points out a random picture of the Earth, and then shifts to the Van Allen belts and the sun's solar flares. He's completely off the ranch right now when it comes to critiquing my video, but let's watch him run. He talks about the color of the water on the Earth images never being the same, as if he doesn't understand that different cameras and different processing techniques have different color gamuts and return different results. Hell, one of the first lessons I learned upon doing multiple camera video shoots is to use the same brand of camera with the same sensors, so I could save time by not having to color match the different shots of the same event. Anyway, Richard finally gets back to the subject. Kind of. Richard claims that math cannot be used to support my position because NASA had math.
A lot of people use math as their solution, but the problem with math is NASA had hundreds of thousands of people doing math. So math's not going to work to complete that process in some situations.
He even goes so far to claim that if the distances and sizes that NASA claims are true, you wouldn't be able to see the moon.
The Earth is massive. And then when you are shown by NASA what they think the distance is, you look at it and go, you wouldn't even see the dang moon. You wouldn't even know it was there. Something's not right with NASA's math.
He then jumps to this series of images taken from millions of miles out and claims the clouds don't move. Yes, we're off the subject of my video again, but let me address this for a moment. In the image sequence Richard uses, the Earth is only 440 pixels wide. That means each pixel covers 14.5 kilometers or about 9 miles. How much detailed movement does he expect to see? But if he were to take the time to pull up the higher resolution images, where the Earth is 1580 pixels wide, that's each pixel representing 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles, you can actually see the subtle changes in cloud formations. Notice how this obvious patch here disappears, and this change here, and this here. It wouldn't take away from the fact that Richard is discussing something that had nothing to do with my video, but if he had taken the 10 minutes it took me to pull these images together, maybe he wouldn't have made such an ignorant statement. Okay, I think he's getting back on track now. Wait, no.
This particular situation, though, we have to actually think about it in a reverse thought.
What the fuck is he talking about? Reverse thought?
Now, this is from the moon. This is also somebody's idea of what it should look like on the moon. And the thing is I always had a problem with...
Now he's talking about a photo from Apollo 11 that he doesn't like, and we'll get to later. Oh, man, does this guy just record himself talking stream of consciousness and then just find images to match his words? Okay, now he's really talking about my video and criticizes me for not telling my source of the footage, which is the only sensible point he's made this entire video. Though I gave the source in a prior video, I didn't mention it in this one. And oddly enough, Richard doesn't give it either. This is, of course, NASA footage. It's distributed on a DVD, actually, the Apollo Men on the Moon. I've uploaded all the command module footage onto my channel. This footage comes from the Apollo 11 television transmission at 30 hours, 28 minutes ground elapsed time. Richard then claims that this footage was not done by a transparency. In other words, he agrees with me on that point, but he wouldn't dare say that. But it was done by a simulation process. He then says that I don't show the complete footage and that it's more compelling with the full footage. He then shows it and provides no explanation as to why it's more compelling or as to how my not showing this extra portion takes away from my point. He then makes an abrupt shift to a simulation of the moon with what he says is the Earth in the distance. He says that this somehow proves that the distance claimed by NASA isn't right.
They don't want you to see that the distance isn't right.
Remember earlier he claimed that we shouldn't be able to see the moon at the distance claimed by NASA. And this is apparently his evidence. Now, I could talk about how whatever setup he has here doesn't reflect reality, but it just so happens he debunks himself later, so I'll hold my fire for now. He then says my video wasn't truly using 3D, and he would do so in his next video in order to critique me. One video down, and where do we stand? He's claimed transparencies and models were used to fake footage, promoted the not against the glass claim, said the Earth's colors looked funny, said that math can't be used to prove footage, used low-quality image to make claims about the clouds, made one valid point about me not citing a reference, agreed with me that the footage I showed was not using a transparency but claimed a simulator, mentioned twice that NASA's numbers say you can't see the moon from the Earth, and promised to bring 3D evidence in his next section. That's a whole lot of nothing. Take a break, get some water. There's more to come. Okay, in part 2 of his rebuttal to my Above the Belt video, Richard gets to the action quickly. He says he has an Earth and moon at the right size and scale and distance, with no mistakes.
It is key to make sure that there are no mistakes during this procedure. Others will question.
He says the speed of the orbits and rotation don't matter, and that's pretty much true, but he says the size and distances are correct, and that is important. He then cuts to a sequence and claims to show what the Earth actually would look like from the moon. It doesn't fit with what I've seen in the past, but he says it's accurate. We can only take him at his word. And he adds,
That's not me. That's math and reality.
But wait, didn't he say in his last video that math wouldn't work because NASA had math? And didn't he say that at the distances and sizes NASA claims, you wouldn't even be able to see the moon? That you wouldn't even know it was there? If you use the same NASA numbers to make this simulation, why is the Earth so big? I know it's bigger than the moon, but only 4 times bigger. If NASA's numbers mean you can't even see the moon, how is 4 times bigger so big? 4 times bigger than impossible to see is not huge. So either something is wrong with his image, something is wrong with his NASA distance claim, or both. I'm thinking both. The best way for me to prove this will be to recreate it properly, and that's what I will do in a bit. But Richard keeps going. He then shows what he says is a simulation of what the Earth would look like from halfway to the moon. But oddly enough, it's the exact same size on screen as the previous shot from all the way to the moon. You can claim all you want that your simulation reflects reality, but a basic fact of reality is this. All other things being equal, if you move an object closer to you or move yourself closer to it looks bigger. So something is wrong with this simulation. He can claim it's accurate, but if the shot from the moon looks exactly the same as a shot halfway to the moon, you messed up somewhere. And this is just the Earth floating in space. The Apollo footage had a window in the foreground. How is this comparable at all, Richard? It's not, and it comes up again in his next video. And just because he can, he mentions that Apollo 11 image that he doesn't like again. Promises to cover it in another video, and then ends this video. What? Okay, in part 3, after briefly mentioning the Van Allen belts, Richard goes into making the simulation of the Earth and Moon that he used in the prior video. Again, he derides the use of math, seemingly unaware that the very programs he uses to make his simulations are also using said math. Right off the bat, he mentions he scaled it down to a manageable size because
Earth is so huge that we have to do some math to bring it into a proper scale.
he said he had to use math. I couldn't make this up, folks. So given that he has such disdain for math and doesn't show his process of scaling, we have no idea if he scaled these correctly. We have no way of knowing. Alright, he points out a few things and then says this.
Somebody wanted to put a window in there. Well, we can go ahead and do that. Kind of a little bit silly to me that you actually require that to actually see.
He says it's silly to want to put a window in the shot, which is odd because the original footage that we are all talking about, supposedly, is footage of the Earth as seen in relation to a window of a specific size. The only way to tell how big something appears to be is to compare it to something you know the size of. If we want to discuss how big the Earth should have looked through that window, we have to have a window in the shot. Period. So he puts a model of the craft in the shot and claims it now shows how the Earth should have appeared through the window, and it doesn't reflect what was seen in the Apollo 11 window. It's compelling and would be even more compelling if we knew he had done his math correctly, brought in a model of the proper size, or set up a proper camera. But we don't, so I can only give it so much credibility, especially since the Earth in this shot here is bigger than in this shot, which is supposedly closer to the Earth. The video ends with former NASA Administrator Charles Bolden saying he couldn't approve a Mars mission due to radiation concerns. It has nothing to do with my video at all, but that's par for the course. Part 4 starts off with a lie, as Richard says I claim to be a 3D expert. Never have I spoken or written those words, but I can't expect Richard to stick to the truth. He's shown no tendency to do so to this point. He says he's not going to provide the values he used because he already has, but of course, that is not the case. He claimed that he used the values generally accepted as the size and distance of the Earth and Moon, but he also said that he scaled them down to a manageable size. Since we don't know if he scaled them correctly, we don't actually know what values he used here. He goes through his setup, but in the end he doesn't provide any useful information about his layout. He just uses the time to repeatedly claim that I should know all of it if I'm such a 3D expert. Again, something I've never claimed. There you have it, folks, his full rebuttal to my video. And I have to say, he did a pretty piss-poor job of it. But you know what? I have to be more specific, and the only way to do that is to create a simulation of my own to point out his shortcomings. First, let me make all the elements I'll need. The Earth, at size. I'll make a basic sphere, and make it the same radius of the Earth, 6,371 kilometers. Full size. I'll add an image texture to it so it looks like, the Earth. Next, I'll make the moon using the same technique. Real size, texture. Next, I'll make a basic window. Nothing fancy needed. I don't need to download a model of the craft. A basic box of 2.97 meters wide and tall, with 9 sections across the main axis, so when I take out this center block, it's a window of exactly 33 centimeters wide and tall. I'll make it gold so it's nice and distinctive. And I'm going to make 2 other things. I'll make a torus the size of the inner Van Allen belt, which goes out to about 6,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, starting from about 1,000 kilometers above the Earth. The height doesn't matter for this demo, so I'll just give it a visually appealing value. I make it red. Then I make another torus the size of the outer belt, out to 60,000 kilometers above the Earth from about 13,000 kilometers above the Earth. Make that puppy blue. Let's bring them together. I start off with a new layout. The first thing I bring in is my Mach command module window. Now, I tinkered around with this and I found that it was nearly impossible to fine-tune the camera and the window once I bring in the large elements, so I just deal with the window first. I make the camera fit the general specs of the TV camera that was used in the Apollo 11 command module, specifically its 25mm focal length, which represents the camera zoomed all the way out, seeing as wide a view as possible. The TV camera could zoom in with a focal length of 150 millimeters, but the footage shows the camera was definitely zooming out. I place the camera up to the window and adjust the distance and angle until I get a look that closely resembles the last image of the Earth up against the edge of the window in the footage. That ends up being about half a meter away, with a bit of rotation on a couple of axes. I pair these together so when I move the camera, the window stays right with it. Okay, next I bring in my big ticket items, the Earth, the Moon, and the Van Allen belts. Now, Richard was correct in saying that working at actual distances and dimensions is too unwieldy, so I decide to do things at 1/100th scale. So I scale these giant elements down to 1%. Since they were already real size, they're still quite big. Before I move things out to their relative distances, I'm going to make another camera and stick it on the surface of the Moon and have it target the Earth. Richard had a shot of the Earth from the Moon that didn't make sense, so I want to have a version of that as well. I pair them together so when I move the Moon out to its spot, the camera stays with it. I also use the exact same camera settings as the command module camera so we can compare the two shots. Now, where do I put the Moon? Real distance is 384,400 kilometers. So first let me put it there. Now I'm going to bring it into 1% of that by moving the decimal point over here. Now where does the command module camera and window go? Now the common discussion is that they claim to be 130,000 miles from the Earth. I did a little more digging to get the numbers right. Now the footage here was taken a couple hours before Armstrong said they were 130,000 miles away, but I'm going to ignore that part. What I did discover, though, was that they were not at 130,000 miles away. They were 130,000 nautical miles away. Actually, 129,000 nautical miles away. In every exchange up to Armstrong making his statement, everyone refers to nautical miles. And immediately after Armstrong makes the statement, Houston states that they are 129,000 nautical miles away. And nautical miles are bigger, so they're even further away from the Earth. They're about 150,000 miles away, or 240,000 kilometers away. That's 5/8 of the way to the Moon. So I put that as a location of the command module window and camera, and then I make it 1% of that. So after setting up some animations and lighting, this is what we have. We have a perspective view here, with the Moon in the foreground, a side view to see a good view of the distances. This is the view from the command module window. At this scale, the window will appear during the render. And here, as I get rid of the schematic view, here is a topside view, which gives a good view of the Van Allen belts. The Van Allen belts won't be in the final render, but I have them here so you can see where the craft was in relation to the belts, and where many of Richard's fellow moon landing deniers claim it was. So, Earth, inner belt, outer belt, command module window at 130,000 nautical miles away, and the Moon. So when I render this out, this is what you'll see. The view will begin with the view from the command module at the distance NASA claimed. Then it will move in past the blue zone of the outer belt and past the red zone of the inner belt to just under the inner belt. And you will see the difference in appearance to what was seen, and then it will move back to the NASA distance again. Here we go. Bam. First off, let's just look at how close my render resembles the view seen in the footage. That's pretty nice. I also have the Earth rotating at 1 degree every 4 minutes, actual speed, and you can't see that that's happening at this distance. Now we move in, crossing into the outer belt, the inner belt, and now at the highest spot just under the Van Allen belts. You only see a slice of the Earth, and if you look closely, you can actually see the rotation of the Earth. If I had clouds moving, weather patterns, you'd likely see those move as well. And now we're moving back to the actual distance of the craft, and damn, that really looks like the footage. I have a whole other video, Above the Belts 2, that gives an even clearer example of how this reflects the real footage. This simulation thoroughly supports my previous Above the Belt video, and since I've shown all the settings and values that I've used and how I scaled them to 1%, I'm confident that this is accurate and that Richard just screwed up his math somewhere. To further demonstrate this, let's look at the shot Richard did of the Earth from the moon. Here's his, and here's mine. There is a difference, but whether or not the difference is significant, we can't yet tell. With just the moon in the foreground, we don't have a good sense of scale. I have no idea what his camera settings are, and just a little bit of zoom would change everything. But he also went on to present a shot simulating the halfway point view, and they were pretty much the same size, remember? Boom, 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 boom. Now let's look again at my shot from the command module window, which has the exact same camera settings as my moon view. Notice that my Earth from the command module looks significantly bigger than my Earth from the moon. Boom, 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 boom. While Richard's renders look the same no matter the distance. Yeah, check your math, Richard. You done messed up, son. And there you have it. I presented what I believe to be a well-constructed disassembling of Richard Anderson's attempt at critical rebuttal to my Above the Belt video. And I provided substantial support to the content of my previous video. This will be the last thing I put out on Richard Anderson, because I honestly believe he doesn't perceive reality the same way I do. And that makes communication impossible, because we don't have a common reference point, reality, to start from. The most simple example is that he insists on saying he's neutral on the moon landing, that he's not a denier. But we all heard him say that a simulator was used. A simulation that was done by Disney, by the way, which he has stated. He's also stated that they used satellite images to make the simulations. Yet now he's stating that satellites don't exist. But even after stating that, he will claim that he is neutral. If you can't agree on the definition of words, you can't communicate. The final straw, the final exchange that proved this man has absolutely no sense of reality, came after the video where I explained why I'm making videos on flat earthers. In it, I said this. Though I've met moon landing deniers that are not flat earthers, I have yet to meet a flat earther that is not a moon landing denier. And for days, Richard commented, complaining that I was wrong to say moon landing deniers were flat earthers. And when I explained that, no, I'm saying that even though I've met moon landing deniers that are not flat earthers, all the flat earthers that I've encountered are also moon landing deniers. I have yet to meet a flat earther that is not a moon landing denier. He still didn't get it. I drew him a picture. He didn't get it. And finally, after numerous exchanges, he tried to quote my words back to me. I said these words. I have yet to meet a flat earther that is not a moon landing denier. He heard these words. This man claims to work for NASA.
That's my job! That's what I do! I don't lose! I win! Is there no one on this planet to even challenge me?
Maybe you came by to congratulate me on last night's victory.